he had a way of bringing out enthusiasm and joy in other people. And I think he did that primarily by always seeing them in their full potential, not just the strange personality or the faults or bad habits or difficult karma that people were manifesting at that moment, but he always saw to the deeper soul within each person. And he acted from love and joy in that person. He said one time to me, you can never understand someone unless you love them. And that's what he did. He just loved and enjoyed other people. And so that enthusiasm to serve God was very infectious. And that's how we should be with people too. Loving them from that soul level, not from a personal level, but from a soul level, seeing God in them. And then it's kriya-yoga in action, because we're working from our highest level relating to other people's highest level. He was very, very energetic, as you can imagine, and occasionally he would want to have a little bit of entertainment, a little bit of downtime. And so we would often watch a movie in the evening, and he would have lots of people over. And we have speculated, Dharmadas and I, many times that he was doing more than just watching a movie. He was actually tuning in to everybody there and giving them energy. Sometimes he wouldn't even really watch the movie that much. It was just an easier way for him to give energy to people, because that's what he was always doing. But he would have fun too sometimes. There was a time when I was very enamored of a particular series of movies, and I would bring one of these over to him. And there were good guys and there were bad guys. And I was very much rooting for the good guys. And Swami, just to tease us all, would, whenever the bad guys came on the screen, he would go, "Yay!" and pretend that he was rooting for the bad guys. And then we'd have to say, no, Swami, those are the bad guys. These are the good guys. So he had a delightful sense of humor, and he was always just at the ready with that. I remember a time when we were, or some of us, I forget who all was in the kitchen, and which was adjacent to his living room at the time, because he was living in the original dome of Crystal Hermitage, which now, of course, is just the middle of a sprawling compound. But at the time, back in the 70s and early 80s, that what is now the round dome of the living room at Crystal Hermitage was the entire house that Swami had. So up where the piano is, if you remember that area was the tiny little kitchen. And someone broke something. A dish fell to the ground and made a huge clatter. And Swami only would say in a fake Italian accent, "Don't break the furniture." Instead of "don't break the furniture," he was just doing this funny little accent. And that just was indicative of he didn't rush to see, oh dear, what china was broken, what my favorite cup or whatever it was. Did you make a huge mess? Is it going to ruin the carpet that's in the kitchen? Nothing like that. It was just this funny, don't break the furniture. And that also was his response to situations. He had a very quirky sense of humor and very endearing. We dearly, dearly miss his lovely sense of humor. And you can still see it in the books. Every once in a while, he'll just have this very interesting take on something that you have to realize that was his sense of humor coming out. He had a lot of ill health in his life. Sometimes we would, when we were living with him in India, we would accompany him to the doctor. And his nurse had prepared about 10 pages of written descriptions of all the different maladies that he'd had, all the surgeries that he'd had. And it was quite an impressive list. 3 hip surgeries, because one side had to be redone, diabetes and colon cancer, and on and on and on. A sinus infection that went on for years. And he jokingly said that when he got pneumonia, it finally cleared up his sinus infection because they gave him the right antibiotics or some medicine that finally cleared it up. Another time I remember we had this doorbell system rigged up in our house so that he could just hit a bell or a buzzer next to his bedside, and it would ring in our room, and we would come. And he was so ill he couldn't even sit up in bed, and we called Dr. Peter in America, and what should we do? And we described the symptoms, and he said, get him to the emergency room. So we called an ambulance, and it was so sweet because he lived on the top floor of our first house in Gurgaon, and I think it had 4 flights of stairs, and everyone in the house came and lined the stairs. He was strapped to a board that the ambulance men, so he wouldn't fall off these stairs. And then we handed him from person to person all the way down the circular stairs. And he went in the ambulance to the hospital. Dharmadas stayed in the hospital room with him. And afterwards, when he was well enough, he said, it was just so disappointing because they didn't turn on the siren. Here I had this ride in the ambulance, and they didn't get to hear the siren. And I said, well, Swami, it was 3 a.m. There was no traffic out there. But another time, he went in the ambulance, and we pretended to be a siren, because that time he didn't have a siren either. Anyway, that gives you an indication of his incredible sense of humor. But when we would take him to the doctor with this sheaf of papers describing his many conditions, the doctor would often look at him and then look at the paper and look at him again, sort of wondering, how can you still be alive with all that's going on? But Swamiji transcended his body. Many were the times when I remember wheeling him in the wheelchair from his room in a hotel, down the elevator, down the hallways, to a big hall where he was scheduled to give a lecture. And I would be wondering, Divine Mother, how can he even stand up? How can I convince him to just sit in the wheelchair, and we'll move the microphone so that you can be seated at least? For an hour and a half, he would have me just stop the wheelchair right at the edge of the stage, and he would get up and he would go out. And sometimes he wouldn't even lean on the podium, and he would give this incredible talk for an hour and a half standing. It was always miraculous to me that he could do that, seeing how just a few minutes beforehand he would be just so weak. But that's kriya-yoga in action. That's saying, Divine Mother, I can't do this, but you can do it. And so I offer myself as your channel, and I give myself completely into your hands. And in that way, he was able to do so many things for God. So let us remember that that's the way to live in this world, to be free of any resistance to God, offering oneself completely into that trust that God will take care of us, and that self-offering which says, I am yours. Use me as your instrument of blessing in this world. That's all we ever live for. And that's certainly all he ever lived for, was to be a channel for Divine Mother.